Well, Kelly, I love when Pastor says when we have technical difficulties, that means the Holy Spirit is moving. And I think right now the Spirit is upon us, everybody. So we are having a few technical difficulties. So if you're wondering why we didn't start right on time, we do want to respect your time. But sometimes things are just out of our control, right? But what we are in control of is having some fun.
That's right. And tonight, parents, we're so glad you're here tonight. We actually have a giveaway. So Hillary Morgan Ferrer is our guest speaker this evening, and she wrote this incredible resource. It's called Mama Bear Apologetics Guide to Sexuality. So how many of y'all have already read this book or perhaps participated in our iMom Bible study? Right? So you guys can testify that's an incredible resource. How many of you would love a copy of this book tonight? Okay.
Awesome.
Let's see. Who drove in from the furthest away this evening? How far did y'all have to travel to get here?
All right, White House. We got a tie for White House right here. 5 minutes.
Clarksville. Okay.
Clarksville beats the 5-minute mark. All right, while Kelly's doing that, I would love to ask the question, how many of y'all think you have the most kids in the household right now? Brandon, we need to talk, buddy. All right, we got, that's a hands down. It's competition between y'all and the Sloan family, probably. Sloans aren't here. Are the Sloan family here? No. Y'all have got 3. All right, anybody beat 3? 4? 5? Anybody beat 5?
8.
7? I was coming to y'all. I knew y'all had more than 5. All right, we have 8 right there. All right. If any of y'all think you can beat me for the worst, no, I'm kidding. The kids ministry has labeled my child the runner. If you pulled Willow Moore up, it says in parentheses runner on there. All right. So if anybody, we had somebody watch her this morning and said she was the sweetest thing I've ever seen. I was like, can you please record that? Oh man. Well, no, we are super thankful. Anybody else that has not gotten this book that feels like they would want one? We're going to have a wrestling match, Miss Beth. So thank you for raising your hand. I'm totally kidding. So we did most kids drove the furthest, and
who invited the most people?
Oh. Meredith, how many did you invite? A lot. 11? That's funny. Hey, life groups count. This isn't just a women's thing. She said I invited their husbands too.
Yeah, so about that, I know the title can be deceiving, but dads in the room, this is a really great resource. So if you have not read it yet, I strongly encourage you to pick it up, read through it. She has 2 books. The first one is about apologetics in general, and the second one, The Guide to Sexuality, specifically deals with culture, gender identity, and all of the things that our kids and our students are facing right now. So like I said, just a really important resource for us as parents to be informed about.
Yeah, we're super thankful that we've got a resource like this, because right now this topic is very difficult because there's so many things out there that influence us. So we're super thankful to have a resource that we believe in, that is biblically based, and a huge resource. So here's one thing. We're going to wrap it up with this portion of it until we get the timer, and that's our go ahead to start here in a second. But we do want to point out something that we've got as a resource for you that we want to partner as a church with you as parents and as families. Is if you look over here where our coffee and where we've got these booths and tables set up, we have incredible resources for ministries in our church, and we would love to partner with you. And so we've got the Next Gen team, kids and students have partnered there in the middle. Then we've got Celebrate Recovery and The Landing. So The Landing is an amazing opportunity for for students to be involved in Celebrate Recovery, but it's called The Landing. They meet every Monday night, and they've done an incredible job with that. It's grown to already over 20 plus students. 30. I'm so sorry. 30. They've already had 2 salvations and working on 3 baptisms. And these are students that are struggling with hurts, habits, hang-ups, and like a Wednesday night just isn't their jam. But Mondays work so well for them. So we've got that as a partner. And then we've got missions, and we have groups as well. So we'd love for you guys to make your way over there at any time. And then you can ask us questions and how you can partner. And then the next thing is you can ask questions.
Yeah, so throughout tonight, you can text any question you have to 98173. After Hillary talks, we'll have about a 30-minute time for questions and answers. And so if you're curious about what resources the church has, you can also text resources to 98173 or any question that's on your mind, and Hillary is here to help answer that.
Absolutely. Well, you're probably going to hear this being repeated here in a few minutes when we start again, so thank God for being patient. But if you're like me, you need to hear things more than once anyway. And so once we go live here in a second, we'll say a few of those things in case you missed that. But right now, I want you guys to talk around your tables. You can go see some resources, ask some questions, or grab your 5th cup of coffee, and we'll get started here in a second. Thank you, guys. All right, we're going to welcome our online crowd. We're so thankful that you guys have chosen to join us from anywhere and everywhere and all over the place. It was really cool to see how many different people are tuning in from all over, from different states and different areas of Nashville. And so we welcome everybody from online and everybody that's in the room. We are so thankful again that you guys are here. This is going to be a great night with an incredible resource. And I'm excited, even though I have a 3-year-old, just to help better navigate conversation as she gets older. And I know we have an incredible person that's going to tune in and kind of give us some information tonight too, Kelly.
We're so excited to hear from Hillary Morgan Ferrer. She's the author of the Mama Bear Apologetics books. And like Will said, if you are a parent, then you understand the importance of talking to our kids about what Scripture says from a very young age. And as you're raising teenagers, it only gets more complicated and more difficult. And so we're so thankful for this opportunity to partner with you. That is the heartbeat of our Next Gen ministry, is that we want to link arm with parents and navigate this crucial season with you. So we're really excited that you're here tonight or joining us online. Really honored for the opportunity to hear from Hillary. Throughout the night, if you have questions, be sure to text those in to 98173. Also, if you're looking for additional resources, you can simply text resources to 98173. We've got a ton of great stuff for you to help you throughout this season of parenthood.
That's right. And if you're in the room, like I said earlier, we've got booths that are over to my left, your right. Any information from several great resources and partnerships in our church, we'd love to get information in your hand and how we can better serve and partner with you. Right now, what I want to do is I would love to welcome in Hillary, if we're good to do that. I want to welcome in Hillary and you guys to see. Hillary, how are we doing? Can you hear me okay?
Yep, I can hear you all great.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your patience.
I can hear me and you.
I love it. Well, look, we are so thankful that you're here. Several of the people in the room have walked through with iMom, your book, and have already gotten to hear from you. And so there's a lot more people in the room because of that. And a lot of people, somebody invited 11 people tonight. And so we're super thankful for that. And so, hey, we were going to turn it over to you and let you do your thing. Thank you so much for being here. Everybody give it up for Miss Hillary.
Absolutely. So this is going to be, like they said, we're having some technical difficulties. So what I'm seeing on my screen and your screen are slightly different. So, but we're gonna make it through this. It's all the same information. But look, I can see the whole crowd there. This is such an interesting kind of hybrid event. I haven't done something like this before, so this is fun. So first off, again, I'm Hillary Morgan Ferrer. And so when my publisher had asked me about this book, wanting to write it, I had stayed as far away as I could from writing this book. I kind of avoided it like the plague and actually turned it down multiple times, which my husband told me that if he had known that, he would have encouraged me. But it's because I think I recognize that in our culture right now, it's like the area of gender and sexuality is so knotted and confused that the knots even have knots. And so trying to untangle this massive confusion can feel like such a daunting task. And so I feel like I kind of almost went through that process along with Amy, one of my contributors, co-writers. We kind of went through that process before y'all did. To try to understand, get a large, kind of 30,000 view picture of what's actually going on, break it down into understandable chunks, and then try to explain each one of those so that you can build a solid foundation with your children with a biblical sexuality. Because I grew up with a very biblical sexuality, but it wasn't until probably my late 20s that my husband bought me a book that just really resonated with me. So the first 4 chapters in the Mama Bear Guide to Sexuality book are going to be building that foundation with your kids on what the Bible says and why he says it. It's not just don't do it until you're married. Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. Do it. Okay, you're married. Now do it. Because that has been very harmful for a lot of people. And we talk about that in the purity culture chapter. So the thing that I want to focus on today is what is on your screen right now. We cannot refute that which we don't understand. And I say this several times throughout the book. We cannot refute that which we don't understand. So tonight we're going to be talking about sex and culture. And because of that, we are going to be talking about the stuff that we may not understand right now about what is going on in culture. So first off, we're going to start out with kind of a vocabulary lesson and worldview comparison, where we're going to take a look at the biblical worldview for sex, or the biblical sexual worldview, and the secular sexual worldview. That's hard to say very quickly. Next, we're going to look at 3 main tactics that I see that are being kind of propagated in culture, that culture is doing specifically to target our children. Which is linguistic theft, moralization, and repetition. And for those of you who've read the first book, you're familiar with linguistic theft. So we go kind of a more deep dive into that in the second book. 3, we want to answer the question, what the heck is going on in education? So I just have to say, I think y'all are in Tennessee, which from what I've talked to people, you've got some really good stuff going on in education in Tennessee. But across the nation, that is not necessarily the case. So, and there can even probably be pockets in Tennessee, some of which are doing their own thing versus the ones that are following the national sex education standards, which we will talk about. And then finally, we don't want to just have all this knowledge and just feel like, just got this load dumped up on, on top of me. What can we do as parents? What are some practical tips? What are some things that you can start implementing tomorrow that will help you start getting a grasp on this? Maybe if your kids are younger, start building that foundation from the beginning. If your kids are older and they're encountering some of this stuff in their schools and in their culture and their movies and magazines and music, what can we do as parents? So moving on, I want to talk about the perspective. So Tyler, advance the slide. Yep, you got it. Thank you. But this is something that I talk very strongly about in the Mama Bear book. We have to really understand who we're talking to in culture at this point. Are we talking to rebels or are we talking to captives? So in 2 Corinthians 10:5, it says, we demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. And then in Colossians 2:8, it says, see that no one takes you captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy, which depends on human tradition and the elemental spiritual forces of this world rather than on Christ. So we have a captivity that's going on. Are we taking our thoughts captive, or are we being taken captive to what is going on in culture? So Tyler, advance to the next slide. This is kind of what I see going on, and this is one of the things when I was writing the book that just broke me. I've heard stories before back, specifically in the Vietnam War. I think it also happens in some of the Middle East war, but I know specifically talking to Vietnam vets, they talked about how there was this type of human warfare that we really had not seen in wars in the past, where children were being commandeered to fight the battle for the adults. And so sometimes you would see a baby and a soldier would pick up that baby, that crying baby who was out by itself. But what he didn't know is there was explosive in the diapers. Or you would see young children that were carrying these firearms. And so the Vietnam vets, they had to realize that even these children could be used as weapons of the enemy. And so this is kind of what I see when I kind of had this comparison and this analogy in my head. I just kind of broke for what I saw happening in our culture, that it's not just children, but it's just specifically children kind of represent who is the most vulnerable in society, who is someone who cannot protect themselves. And so what we have is we have people, and then we have ideas. We have ideologies that have latched themselves onto people. And so what we have is people who, when we are trying to talk down about the ideologies, say, no, this is not right, this is raised against the knowledge of God, all they can hear is someone attacking them because they don't know the difference. So we have to recognize that we're not always dealing with rebels. Sometimes we're dealing with captives. And the way that you have to deal with captives is you have to separate them from, in this case, the ideology that has kept them captive. And once you separate the captor from the captive, then you can take an accurate shot. But as long as they're so closely intertwined, anything that we say against the ideology can be interpreted to them as being waged against themselves. And so this is where sexuality becomes such a delicate topic, such a nuanced topic, that we have to make sure that we are remembering that we are talking to people, that we are talking to people who have been taken captive by these ideas. And we need to do it with gentleness and respect and love. So moving on, I said we're going to have a vocabulary lesson. I don't introduce, fancy words just for the sake of fancy words. Sometimes there's a word in this particular instance in Greek that it's just we don't have a word for it, and that is the word telos. So I'm going to have a couple slides here that really explain what telos is. So telos is the idea that something was created for a purpose, and the absolute best thing that it can do is to behave according to that purpose. So we would say the telos of scissors is to cut things. The telos of a printer is to print things. There was someone who designed them for this purpose. And now, this is an inanimate object, but we see telos happening in the living world as well. Next slide, please. So this is telos in animals, and I love this picture because I specifically look for this one of the beaver. So at the top left, we've got a row of turtles here that are sunbathing. Those are some happy turtles because they were created with the ability to take in the sun's rays. That's how they keep their body temperature up. So they are behaving according to their nature. Right beneath them is a beaver dam. Beavers build dams. It doesn't matter if they have the materials to build dams. Look at the beaver to the right. This is something where every now and then you'll have a rescued beaver that becomes a domesticated beaver, and you can see videos on YouTube and stuff where they will build these little dams in the houses that they're in. It'll be full of stuffed animals, and they're building a dam because they're a beaver. They were designed to build dams, even if it's a bunch of stuffed animals. They're gonna do what beavers do. The bottom left one there is the sheepdog. My sister and brother-in-law have a couple of these, and I remember when the kids were young and the sheepdogs would just like run around the kids because they have something in them. God designed them with something in them that says, I need to corral whatever is within my vicinity. Or if we look at the salmon on the right, the salmon swim downstream after they're born, and then they swim upstream, which is completely unnatural. No one has to teach them how to do this. They know instinctively to do this because they are behaving according to God's design. So next slide real quick. So we can see even in the animal kingdom when animals are behaving according to their design and when they're not. A lot of times we'll see this manifest in just overall animal happiness just because animals want to behave according to their nature. And when they are prevented from behaving according to their nature, that is an unhealthy animal. Like the one on the bottom left, he's all cooped up, or the one on the right with the chain. Those you can tell just by looking at them that they are unhappy and they are unhealthy because they are not being able to live according to their telos, according to their design, according to their purpose. You know, dogs in particular were created for fellowship. I think with humans, you see dogs flourish in relationship with human beings. There's certain dogs that you see flourish. It's like it doesn't matter how young of a puppy you throw something, it'll back to you for whatever reason, because I think that's one of the things that God designed in them. And then the one on the left is supposed to show how sometimes we have a telos that can be used at good times and a telos that's used at inappropriate times. So this dog, part of his just dogness, being a dog, means that he is howling or barking or doing whatever, which is great until you have the dog doing that at 2 a.m. And now you have a dog that's behaving according to its telos, but it's at the wrong time. So I would say humans also have a telos. In fact, God describes humans. We have a purpose. We have a telos. We have a design, and sexuality is part of that design. And what happened with original sin is actually our innate instinct of what we are to do as humans got tweaked and it got warped. And so we originally would have naturally gravitated towards what God's design for us was. But when sin entered the world, it's kind of like a car that is always leaning right or always leaning left. You know, the tires are kind of askew, that you have to constantly be kind of working against what happened because something has gone wrong. So let's look at the biblical worldview versus the sexual worldview, secular sexual worldview. These are supposed specifically in terms of sexuality. So within the biblical worldview, we talk about what is humanity, like what does it mean to be human? And so according to the biblical worldview, God's revealed telos, meaning his purpose, us as having the imago Dei, the image of God. That is what it means to be human. We reflect the image of God. In fact, humans just in so many different ways we're supposed to reflect the God who is. And we even have, institution of marriage that Paul talks about, that itself is this other way that we are meant to reflect God, and specifically Jesus and the church. So that's what we believe it means to be human. It's following what God's design and purpose is. Now, the secular worldview is currently saying that my self-revelation, meaning my authentic self, you'll see this buzz phrase just used all the time. And Tyler, if you want to just flip back and forth between me and the slides so that they're just not staring at text the whole time. This idea that the authentic human self is that is the highest good that we can achieve, that we are supposed to find out who we are and live according to that. But we have a very big problem. According to the biblical worldview, we say that sin corrupts and humans cannot fulfill their telos, their purpose, or follow God's commands. And there's this big long word, I can't remember it from from my seminary days, where perspicuity, I think is it, where it talks about we actually are prone to want what goes against our telos. Think of this like a fish that really wants to be out of water. It wants to do something that is against its design and that is actually harmful to it. And that is what sin has done to us. And so we can't tell what our original design was because we actually crave something other than our original design. However, the secular sexual worldview also has interpretation of what the problem is and what has gone wrong. And you will see this over and over again. If you can kind of internalize this chart here, I think you'll start having lots and lots of aha moments as you're listening to the news and as you're seeing what's going on within gender and sexuality. So what the secular worldview, and I say currently, because I swear this thing just changes like every 5 minutes. It's like the words that we could use, a year ago are suddenly offensive now. But one of the things that they very much emphasize is this concept that power structures, meaning cultural norms, inhibit, and humans cannot live their authentic selves. So what they're saying here, and we're going to actually see this in the language of the new sexual education standards, is that cultural norms are the things that have defined men as men and women as women, and the idea that men and women get together for sexual relationship to have children, and that is the natural course of human events. According to the secular worldview, that is a power structure and a cultural norm that is unnaturally being foisted onto humans. And in order to break free of that, we need to break free of this idea of males and females being separate, of males and females being together in sexuality, and be able to live our authentic selves, no matter how that may manifest for each individual person. And that's kind of what the problem is. So we have, what is humanity? What is the problem? Now each worldview is going to tell us what is good, what is evil, and what is the solution to the problem that we just said. So according to the biblical worldview, good is anything that displays God's original purpose, his telos, his design, and his commandments. I would say his commandments kind of came, it said that Jesus even had to learn obedience. So it's like, we can't say that every single thing that he ever commanded is going to come naturally, but it can be learned. If the perfect Son of God had to learn obedience, then there still are things according to our human nature that we still have to learn, even if we were operating perfectly. But we still say that good, for something to be good, for something to be healthy, is that which conforms to God's original design, versus the secular worldview is going to say that which displays self-knowledge and the freedom to be one's authentic self. So it is good to discover who you are. If it's different than a male or female or someone who is sexually attracted to someone of the opposite gender, the very best you could have for yourself is discovering who that authentic self is and being able to live freely in that authentic self, which brings us down to evil. Evil, according to the biblical worldview, is anything that distorts the imago Dei and goes against God's command. So anything that distorts our purpose or our telos and goes against the commands of God, that's what we're going to be calling evil. According to the secular worldview, is that anything that prevents someone from equal outcomes while living their authentic self. So I want to say this specifically because this has changed within the last 10 years. Like we had this whole live and let live mentality in the past where it was, you be you, you do you boo kind of mentality. But that wasn't actually even going far enough according to today's standards. Today's standards say if you believe that you are a dog or a cat or a fairy, they have all sorts of different things that you can identify as. Not only is freedom and goodness being able to live in that authentic self, but is actually evil to have anything which prevents your equal outcomes. Meaning if I want to go to a job or if I want to go to a school or if I want to do whatever, as a dog or a cat or a fairy or a trans, just all the different things, whatever I identify as is my authentic self, I need to have equal outcomes, meaning that I can be employed just like everyone else. I can teach kindergartners if I want to. I can do whatever I want. I need to have those equal outcomes that however I identify as my authentic self will not affect anything else in my world. And this is something we need to pay attention to with the erasure of the word pedophile. The word pedophile itself right now is even being erased and turned into minor attracted person. So if y'all seen the acronym MAP, M-A-P, and you've wondered what that means, that stands for minor attracted person. They are creating this new category so that if someone says this is my authentic self, well, evil will be preventing them from living that authentic self wherever they want in whatever job they want. And so finally, the solution, this is kind of a no-brainer for us as Christians, but the solution is salvation and sanctification. I think sometimes people put so much emphasis on salvation that yes, absolutely, we need to have that regenerative moment in our experience, but it's the sanctification process, because when we are saved, when we are regenerated, we don't suddenly have a will that immediately turns back to wanting God's design, God's purpose, God's telos for our lives. It's like we have to retrain ourselves. I think one of the big differences between someone who is a truly regenerated Christian versus someone who's not is they at least desire to have those correct desires. They desire to follow God's law. They desire to follow God's purpose and God's standards. They may not necessarily achieve that all the time, but their desires have been turned towards that. And that is the sanctification process where we learn to basically what our flesh desires, we learn to say, no, I don't want to do that. I'm choosing to do what God originally designed me for, no matter how I feel about it. And honestly, as you go along in life and the more you practice sanctification, it does get a lot easier. I think that just as we develop newer habits, and we talk about it in the final afterword of the Mama Bear book, just neurologically, the more we choose certain behaviors, the easier they become. So that sanctification process, if you are actively involved with that, with the Lord, it does become easier and easier. Now, according to the secular worldview, the solution to everything is self-knowledge and social justice. So let's talk about what we mean. Self-knowledge, you have to know who you are. You have to know what you like. You have to discover what it is that is outside the cultural norms that you were born into, that is outside what people's expectations are for you, and that is outside any prescriptive design for who you are. No one can tell you who you are. And again, we're going to see this in the language of the new sexual education standards. So first off, you have to have that self-knowledge and be able to declare it to the world. And then once you have that self-knowledge, you need to work for what we call social justice, meaning that we want everybody else who has fallen outside of the cultural norms, who have been marginalized by society, we need to work to make sure that they are just as represented, that they are just as able, that they have those equal outcomes within their life, however they have discovered their authentic self to be. I almost want to just stop right there to see if we've had any questions come in about about that, because I know that's a lot of information to be dumping on. And we've got an hour and a half, so we can do all the Q&A at the end, or we could do some of it kind of interspersed. Does anyone have any thoughts on that? I can't hear anybody. Okay, we'll just do it then. Okay, moving on. I know that's a lot of information. I think they have printed this chart out for you. Again, I really think if you study this chart, and this chart actually is not in the book, so that's why we have the printouts for you. This is going to explain how the difference between where everybody is starting off. So next, we're going to move on to the next slide, where we're going to talk really quickly about 3 tactics that we see going on. These will be a lot more easy to understand than the just initial deep dive into worldview that we just did. So these 3 tactics are linguistic theft, moralizing evil, and repetition. So linguistic theft is the idea that you redefine words so that they can portray good as evil and evil as good. So one of the examples from this I noticed recently, I just decided to go on and Google hate definition, and it actually came up. Do I have this in the slideshow? Oh, it's coming up later in the slideshow, so we'll get to that. if you've noticed people using words and you're like, well, you're using that word, I don't think you're using that in the same way that I use it. You've probably hit on something very, very real. Secondly is moralizing evil. So every single person is still endowed with God's law in their heart. So we instinctively know of good and evil. And so what we have basically society trying to do is using people's innate sense of good and evil to get them to accept the new rules that they have placed forward with this new language. And I trust me, we're going to go into this a little bit more. And then finally, this concept of repetition is you repeat an idea over and over and over again until it's so familiar that the person accepts it as true. Now, there's a book that my father got me that's a great book. It's super big, but full of just psychology experiments. And his name is David Kahneman that wrote the book. But one of the things he says in there is that the human brain has difficulty distinguishing between that which is familiar, and that which is true. So what that means is the more someone hears something, the more true it sounds to them, to the point of where they don't even need evidence to prove the validity. It is just taken for granted. And so one of the things that was, basically unheard of, maybe 15 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, is this idea of being born in the wrong body. The idea that gender identity and one's sexual gender, biological sex, could be different. That was absolutely unheard of in just regular communities up until maybe like 10 years ago, in 10 or 15. And now it is so widely accepted that you can have a different gender identity than your biological sex that people don't even feel the need to argue about it. They accept it as a given. And the reason is because of repetition. They've heard it over and over and over again. And we're going to talk about where we're seeing this stuff being repeated. So next slide. This book called Holly Ordway wrote Apologetics and the Imagination. She has this great quote in there that says, once language becomes routinely distorted, it becomes increasingly easy to justify and promote evil, while at the same time hiding behind positive words. This is exactly what we're seeing happen in our culture right now, with words just that are being stolen and the definitions changed. So here's an example of something my friend posted on Facebook the other day. Let's see the next slide. This is an example of a pretty extreme linguistic theft that's going on, but this is making the rounds on Facebook. To be born again as a Christian is not to become something else, but to become your authentic self, even as you seek that for others. Therefore, people who risk losing their families, their jobs, even their lives, to claim their true identity as LGBTQ+, set an example for what it means to be born again and help create that beloved community of God's kingdom, which is yet possible on earth as it is in heaven. So this is a really, really obvious example of linguistic theft. The idea of being born again is to not become something else. That right there is very, very much divided from what Scripture says. To be born again really means you die to yourself and you are made a new creation. But again, this brings in the authentic self. Look at if you look back at your chart, look at this idea of good and this idea of evil, of that which helps you know and that which helps you seek everyone else, being able to live as their authentic selves versus conforming ourself to who God has called us to be and who he says he designed us to be. So this is just kind of like a really obvious example of linguistic theft. The next tactic that we see going on is moralizing. So there's a book that I highly recommend people read if they really want to understand what's going on in culture right now in terms of these tactics that are going on. It's written by a guy named Saul Lindsay called Rules for Radicals, and this is what he says. The 10th rule of ethics and means is that you do what you can with what you have, and you clothe it in moral garments, for all effective means require the passport of morality. So what he's saying is he's trying to organize people. If you read earlier in the book, he's saying, I'm trying to help people organize for power and then know what to do with it. And what he says is, in order to have power, in order to organize for power, you have to clothe whatever it is you're doing in moral garments, meaning you have to give words that sound positive, because he knows that nobody will follow anything unless they think they're doing it for the greater good. So this is an example of what I saw, the hate up there. I just decided to look up new definitions. So look at how it's like just keeps getting watered down. To feel strong dislike for or hostility towards. Then the next definition really has no reason to be a new definition. To feel dislike or distaste for. I don't think it's like, first it's strong dislike, then it's just any dislike. And then look at this final definition. To be disinclined to do something out of politeness. This is where we're seeing things like if you're using the wrong, if someone accidentally misgenders someone or uses the wrong pronoun, that is considered hate speech because someone's not doing something that they would normally do out of politeness. And so this is where we're seeing the definition of words being changed before our eyes. So some of the words that are being stolen on the next slide that you'll hear, number one is identity. So identity has always been basically a thing is what it is and not something else. It was a set of criteria that you could actually use to determine what something was. But now identity is becoming so changeable. It's being associated with what's in your mind. Again, this is going back to the authentic self thing, that you no longer can identify something by the outward things that everybody can observe. It's only according to what's according to their mind. The idea of truth and authentic have been completely stolen. Tolerance now no longer means to live in peace despite disagreement. Tolerance now means basically to agree with everybody, which if you have agreement, you don't need tolerance. Tolerance assumes that people disagree. People are not asking for tolerance. They're asking for agreement. Healthcare is one of the big ones that we're going to see. Number one, we see this a lot of times with, the phrases like reproductive justice and labeling abortion as healthcare, which is a whole other debate that we don't want to go into. But just think of the concept of health. Health assumes that people know how something ought to be. In order to understand what healthy is, or to understand what unhealthy is, you need to know what healthy is. In order to understand what healthy is, you have to know how something is supposed to work. If we have removed our ability to know how something is supposed to work and everybody can create in their minds how they think they're supposed to work, you've completely destroyed the concept of healthcare and specifically mental health. So many of the things that we're seeing that are being talked about within gender and sexuality have been considered a mental health issue in the past. Because not a mental health thing, a mental disorder, meaning that there was something that had an order to it that had then become disordered somehow that needed to be corrected. So healthcare now, again, if we go back to our chart, it's being able to live that authentic self. Anything that allows someone to live who they think their authentic self is now healthcare. Bullying would be another one. And this is going to go very much into what's happening with our kids. This concept of zero tolerance bullying seems to only be universally applied to if it falls under the LGBTQ plus umbrella. Kids that it's like disagreeing with people is now considered bullying. Talking about your Christian worldview for someone who doesn't disagree is considered hate speech and bullying. So that word right there has been kind of lost its meaning. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, you'll see this in lots of different places. And then just the concept of love and hate. If we've been taught that love means to affirm whoever someone says their authentic self is, then basically we have redefined truth out of the concept of love. And if you look in 1 Corinthians 13, love does not rejoice with evil, but rejoices in the truth. If we remove truth from love, we cannot have biblical love. And we have these poor kids that are being told, if you loved like Jesus loved, well, then you would accept all these things that are coming towards you. You would accept everybody the way they are and say that what they're doing is healthy. You don't have to necessarily just accept people for who they are. You have to agree that what they believe is healthy. And if you don't, then you're not loving. And so our kids are saying, well, I'm supposed to love like Jesus loved. And they are marching right down that track with what culture is telling them they're supposed to do. So let's move into the new sex education standards. This falls under, that one's I'm sorry, I skipped a slide. So repetition is that final tactic. So it's probably hard to see the picture on the top left says 20 animated shows with LGBTQ plus characters to watch with your kids. Kids programming used to assume that there was just no sexual content at all. In case you haven't noticed, that is not the case anymore. The purpose for kids programming is to actually help them to, well, according to culture, it's helped them to develop in a healthy way. And if culture now defines healthy as being able to know yourself and to identify as your authentic self, then you need examples within children's programming. So your children are going to be exposed to things, anything that is queer, homosexual, same-sex relationships, same-sex parents, same-sex families, trans characters, non-binary characters, agendered characters, pansexual. I mean, the number of different variety of options is fairly limitless right now. In kids programming, anything that's been done recently is trying to introduce these concepts in a kid way because they view themselves as this is what healthy sexual development is. And we're going to see that in the National Sex Education Standards. National Sex Education Standards, we'll go over those in a second. And then there's this book called After the Ball that you have to pay several $100s to get because it's out of print. But if you look underneath that, there's an article called The Overhauling of Straight America by Marshall Kirk and Erastus Pill. I recommend that everybody print that out, Google it and print it out and read it with your kids, because what you're going to see is exactly what we've been seeing recently, namely putting homosexuality before kids so much. And like some of their talking points is portray gays as victims, not aggressive challengers. Give protectors a just cause, meaning if we portray homosexuality as a victim, then you want to make people rise up to actually protect the homosexual community, make gays look good, make the victimizers look bad. Guess who the victimizers are? That would be anybody that has a biblical sexual worldview. So the new National Sex Education Standards, we go through these in two different ways. We talk about some of the actual standards that are out there, and we talk about the guiding mission and principles. So first of all, let's talk about what it is. This came out very shortly after the last election. It was almost like they were waiting, the 2020 election, it was almost like they were almost waiting to see who got elected before they put these out as the national standards. So the NSES is what it's called, stands for National Sex Education Standards. And what I want every parent in the room to know right now is that this is not a government official entity. It makes it sound like it is, but it's not. But that doesn't mean that that over 40% of school districts, and probably more by now, have actually accepted these standards because they think that is a national, it is a government official site. And it really, really sounds like it. SECUS is the name of one of the groups that did, which stands for Sexuality Information and Education Council of the United States. This was a group that was started by Hugh Hefner and Mary Calderon, who's a former medical director for Planned Parenthood. The connections with Planned Parenthood are just, I went through all the board of directors and almost everybody has a connection to Planned Parenthood. And one of the things that you'll see in the Planned Parenthood, on SECUS, on their fact sheet is, by advancing sex education, you are supporting abortion rights. And if you care about abortion rights, then you should care about sex education. So in talking about all the LGBTQ plus stuff, we have to realize that one of the things they are pushing more and more and more for is abortion rights, starting at a younger and younger age. So another group that was part of this was the Advocates for Youth. So I looked them up. They started something called the Abortion Out Loud campaign. Some of you, it's a right along with the Shout Your Abortion. Basically, it's like trying to become proud of the abortion. And then the other group that is involved with this is called Answer, and they have something called the Amaze series of cartoons. And anytime you see someone creating cartoons, you know that they're going for children. And so one of the cartoons that they have is how to tell if you're ready for sex. And one of the things that they literally talk about in there is, are you going to feel closer to the other person? Whoever here has kids, and especially boys, if you ask them why they did do anything, what do they always say? I don't know. Kids don't know why. They do what they do, and especially boys. If you're asking them if they think they're going to project themselves into the future, and am I going to feel closer to this person in the future? That's not something that kids are really able to do. Anyway, so those cartoons, if you can stomach it, it's basically a kind of a series of same-sex cartoons that are making out. With a voiceover that's talking about how to tell if you're ready for sex. So let's look at the actual sex education standards that we've got going on. So this is going to tell us what grades these are for, and each of these are going to build on each other. So in the K through second grade, identify different kinds of families, i.e. nuclear, single parent, blended, intergenerational, cohabitating, adopted, foster, same gender, or interracial. They're trying to make all these different types of families that, they're just different types of families. There is no one type of family that's better or that's more healthy. And there is a sense that kids are going to be exposed to all these different types of families, but that's not the point. The point is to present these as all equally viable and healthy options, which some of the research that we've done well, I don't have time to go into that. There's a lot of, I recommend this book called by Katie Faust and Stacey Manning called, I'm drawing a blank, Them Before Us, which talks about kids' need for access to a biological mother and father. And again, there's sometimes where that ideal cannot be realized. But again, we shouldn't say that these are all basically the same, because they're not. Okay, so that's our K through 12. So our 3rd through 5th graders need to describe the potential role of hormone blockers on young people who identify as transgender. The problem with this is doctors don't even fully know this at this point. They say that they're totally reversible. We're finding out more and more that that's not the case. I don't know if we have any children in the room, but I'll just say a couple of things they're discovering, that if you have a boy that goes through puberty blockers, and he changes his mind at some point, says, no, I think I am okay being a guy, his penis has actually stopped growing and will have a difficulty growing much more. So you're going to end up with an adult male with sometimes a 12-year-old's, the penis the size of a 12-year-old. That is a really damaging thing for a man to go through life with. And for girls, a lot of this, the drugs that they're using are the same drugs that are used for chemical castration. And so you're finding infertility after this that the kids were not told was going to happen later. And again, this is a big experiment. Number 3 for our 3rd through 5th graders, distinguish between sex assigned at birth and gender identity and explain how they may or may not differ. This is another one of those things that we said that has become so repeated that people just take it for granted. Describe and explain differences between cisgender, transgender, gender non-binary, gender expansive, and gender identity. Your 3rd grader needs to be able to describe these differences. Number 5, and this is where we start seeing they actually have a plan for activism, because remember, if we go back to your chart, that social justice aspect being part of what is the solution to the problem. Develop a plan for the school to promote dignity and respect for people of all gender identities and sexual orientations. Now, again, I want to say for the record, I have absolutely no problem with treating everybody with dignity and respect, but I don't think that we need to limit it to people of gender identities and sexual orientations. Why can't we just say we need to promote dignity and respect for all people, period? Because what we're seeing happen here is we're seeing certain groups that are now being celebrated. It's not just promoting dignity and respect, it's celebrating. And when kids see a certain group being celebrated, they want to sit at the proverbial lunch table with that group. We are actually grooming them for who they want to identify with, and if who they identify with can be changed as easily as what's between their legs or who they sleep with, they are going to do it, because every kid is longing for that inclusion, to feel popular, all these different things. So they're taking things that are good, but they're actually pushing our kids in that direction. And then finally, for our 6th through 8th graders, define vaginal, oral, and anal sex and describe the steps to using barrier methods correctly. Now, the standards don't say the withdrawal method here, but that is included, I think, in some of the different cartoons that we've seen. They talk a lot about condoms, but the idea that you would talk to a 6th to 8th grade boy about withdrawal. You know, when I was a kid, it's like we knew what people who use the withdrawal method were called. They were called parents. And the amount of, anyway, there's just a lot of problems with this, expecting a sixth grade boy to actually understand this. We won't go into detail there. Okay. So we're going to look at some of these guiding mission and principles that we have in the sex education standards, which, again, I want to remind you that if you go to your school and find out that this is what they're promoting, you have to make sure that they know that this is not mandated by the government. I can't say that enough. But so here's some of their guiding mission and principles, meaning this is what we believe in so much that we're going to develop like 4 pages before we even get into the standards. This thing that's highlighted right here is very, very important to understand, because this is going to define what it means to have healthy sexuality. The developmental process for young people often involves experimenting with different identities, forms of expression, behaviors, and sexual identity is not exempt from this type of exploration. Basically, what they're going to be teaching is that to have a healthy sexuality, you need to explore all the options, meaning don't knock it till you tried it. You don't know you're not gay until you try gay sex, and then you can decide. This is actually something that is very much promoted. And again, down here in bold, it's not, this is bolded in the original curriculum. It says no one else is qualified to label or judge another person's sexual identity, including their sexual orientation or gender identity. And it is important that the language and terms, remember our linguistic theft, young people use to identify themselves is respected by the adults in their lives. So this is actually telling kids, basically, if the adult in your life does not respect your preferred pronoun or your preferred identity, then that is basically an unhealthy relationship. This is where it's getting between the young people and the parents, and it's basically becoming the parents towards these kids by having them identify as something and then demanding that people respect that. Okay. The next one is in social, racial, reproductive justice, and equity. There's a whole lot going on in this. But first off, sex education should avoid cis-normative, heteronormative approaches. So let's break that down for a second. It's saying that sex education should actually avoid talking about men and women or boys and girls as being different. Cis-normative means that you affirm your biological sex and that's how you identify. Heteronormative, meaning the normal sexual union is between man and woman. So they're actually saying that sex education should avoid these approaches, and that they need to challenge harmful stereotypes, which as we get into this, we're going to discover that they're the ones that are reinforcing these stereotypes more than any other group. And then underneath here, I think this is one of the things that I found really, really interesting, and this goes back to the social justice aspect that you have on your chart, where it talks about health income. So this is going to have this long sentence that I fully agree with, and then they're going to come to a conclusion that I have no idea how that conclusion comes from the sentence they said before. So health outcomes are largely influenced by biology and genetics, individual behavior, social environment, physical environment, and availability of health services. Absolutely. These factors interact and influence health outcomes for individuals. Absolutely. So here's their conclusion based on this. Given this, the updated NSES calls attention to overt and covert discrimination. And then it talks about all the different types of discrimination, including internalized racism. Now, again, we don't want to get off into the whole racism discussion. Yes, there's absolutely racism out there, but what is this doing inside a sex education program? This is where you're seeing taking every single social justice issue that they can possibly have and cramming it in and saying this is sexuality education. In order to have comprehensive sex education, it has to be taught from this perspective. And if you see underlined in yellow underneath it, the standards also reflect a conscious and unconscious bias to avoid perpetuating stereotypes. Now, I want to camp out on this topic right here about perpetuating stereotypes. They're trying to get away from this idea of this is what girls do and this is what boys do. But let's go to the next slide. This is actually different than what you're going to see in the book. This is the gender unicorn. I just wanted you to see it just because this is kind of the newer version. that they have now, it's all the same concepts as the genderbread person, but since a lot of people think the genderbread man, they stopped using that. So go ahead and go to the next slide. The chapter that we have in the book is actually the genderbread person, because this was the first one. So I want you to pay attention to the categories on here. So first off, we have our gender identity. You can go from nothing, and then you have these two separate columns for womanness and manness. And then you have your gender expression, and you have these two separate columns for how feminine or how masculine you are. I gotta ask, how are we determining what is womanness and what is feminine if we are not resorting to gender stereotypes? Think about it. If we don't have gender stereotypes, where are we getting this concept for what is more manly, what is more womanly, what is more feminine, what is more masculine? You don't have that without gender stereotypes. And so we have some researchers saying, oh, kids can tell when they're as young as 2 that they're transgender because they see a boy that gravitates towards a Barbie. That would be a gender stereotype. And it doesn't take into account if this boy has 3 older sisters and he sees them playing with Barbies. Or if he likes to dress up in his mother's clothes, again, because his mother is his world and he knows mom wears high heels. He has no concept of differences between himself and mom yet. He just knows that he loves her or he loves his mom. There's an article that's been out on Facebook for a while of a girl. It shows her as a middle schooler in a football uniform. And then it shows a picture on the right of her currently, and she's like super duper hot, like posed in this short little dress. And she was saying, thank goodness my parents didn't listen to me. I absolutely idolized my brothers when I was younger. And I wanted to be just like them. And my parents would not let me cut my breasts off when I was younger. Thank God that they didn't, because I'm so happy. All of these things that have to do with gender are all based on stereotypes. You cannot get around it. And then the biological sex, the idea that we have a range between femaleness and maleness, I mean, come on. There really is a non-rocket science way of figuring this out. Now, I do want to recognize that there are intersex conditions where sometimes the genitals can be a little bit ambiguous. In fact, there's even certain tribes, I think it's in South America, where they start out, they're raised as girls, and then suddenly somewhere right around puberty, they actually grow larger penises, and it turns out that they're boys. There are very rare, very, very rare conditions that do happen that are like that, but they are so rare. To be truly what people used to call hermaphroditic, and we had we had a nausea med in the 70s that actually produced a whole lot of this, but we really don't see true hermaphrodism in humans, because a hermaphrodite means that basically you can impregnate yourself. There are certain species of animals who are hermaphrodites, that they have fully formed sexual characteristics of both male and female, meaning they can basically impregnate themselves if they want to. You do not see that with humans. What you have is you have male and you have female, and then you have maybe some ambiguity, but only one. It's either one of those sexual reproductive systems will be functioning, or neither of them will be functioning. You don't have this range like they're talking about in here. And then finally, I want to point you out towards the two categories they have. So in the gender unicorn, they have changed the one that says romantically attracted to also emotionally attracted. So we have our sexual attraction. Are you attracted to woman, female, femininity? Again, how do you know unless you're using gender stereotypes? Or the other one is romantically attracted. In their actual curriculum, it says that someone that you're romantically attracted to is someone who you want to go on dates with and have conversations with, but not necessarily have sex with. You want to hang out and you want to talk, but you don't want to have sex with them. Let me think if there is any other word that we can use besides romantically attracted for this. That's what we called friends. by their definition of what romantic attraction is, every single woman in this room is romantically attracted to her best friend. And if we have some guys in there that just really love long conversations with their dudes, then you too. But this to actually take friendship off the table, this is one of those things where sometimes kids don't even know what they're identifying with. There's a friend of mine who's another apologist, whose daughter has a friend who has now come out to her family and friends as pansexual. I can't remember how old she is. It might be like around the 14-year-old range. So let me explain what pansexual is. Pansexual means you like to have sex with men, and you like to have sex with women, and you like to have sex with men who have transitioned to being women, and you like to have sex with women who have transitioned to be men, and any kind of combination thereof. You're good with sex with all of them. You're attracted to all of them. This girl has not had her first kiss yet. And she thinks that pansexual means that she just loves everyone, because again, that word love has been co-opted. So finally, let's move on. We're going to skip the next slide. Just it's straight out of the chapter. So what can we do as parents? And this is where I think the rubber really hits the road. And I wish I could have gone more into detail in some of these. But number one, know what's going on just by being here. You are making yourself aware of the resources that are available. I know this was like a really fast crash course into all the things that are going on. But again, we're talking about sex and culture and how to navigate that. So let's talk about how to navigate this. Remember the first thing that we said when we got here. You cannot refute that which you don't understand. We need, as parents, to say, I'm going to try to, it's scary and it's weird and I don't know what to do this, but I'm going to try to understand this. The second one is to be the expert. Now, I'm not telling you actually have to be the expert. What I am telling you is that there is a psychological phenomena that I can't find any psychologist to tell me the name of it. They all tell me it's a real phenomena, but nobody can tell me what it's called, so I've just named it the founder's effect. The idea that the first person to introduce an idea to you will automatically be considered kind of the expert on the topic from here on out. So some of these things that I just introduced to you, you're going to forever think of me as the expert on. Woohoo! But think about this for your children. If they are getting their first exposure with the concept of what is homosexual, what is transgender, if they're getting that all from school or all from cartoons, whoever it is that is now presented it to them has now become the expert to whom they will refer to in the future. So I'm not saying you need to go pop your children's bubble, but you might need to say, have you heard this word? Have you heard that word? What have you heard about it? And make sure they know that you know. And this is that step after to know what's going on. When you can establish yourself that you know what's going on, they will feel safer to come to you with questions in the future because mom and dad brought it up first. So mom and dad actually know about this. And you can even tell them when you hear someone talking about it, don't give your opinion on it. Just say, I need to talk to my mom about that, or I need to talk to my dad about that. And that establishes you just in a really basic way as the expert, just by being the first person to introduce them to it. The third thing is training your kids to judge rightly. We live in a culture that says, oh, judge not, everybody, nobody can tell you what else is in the Bible except for there's a verse that says, judge not lest ye be judged. They don't look at all the verses that talk about judging rightly. And one of the things that I found very interesting when I was studying for this book is that in the Greek New Testament, the word for righteousness and the word for justice are the same word. It just depends on the context as how it's translated. The word for justice and the word for righteousness are the same. Similarly, the word for injustice and the word for unrighteousness are the same word. So what we need to do is we need to train kids how to judge correctly. And we need to ask them, can you have justice for something that is unrighteous? And the answer to that is no. We cannot promote justice for something that is, according to God's word, not good, that is evil, that is going against God's commands, or that is going against God's design. We cannot promote justice in that way because it is unrighteousness. The third one is just really keeping it simple. I have a friend of mine who lives in Oregon, and it's a very normal thing for when you go on the playground, you'll meet the moms for the first time, and they'll introduce themselves, and they'll introduce their children, and they'll tell you their pronouns, and they'll tell you their children's pronouns. And so this is just a way of life for them. And so her kids are constantly coming to her and saying, well, what about this? What about that? What about that? And she just says, keep it simple. Keep going back to God's original design. Think about the telos that we talked about at the beginning. Is there anything that scissors do better than cutting? I mean, I'm sure you can find something that, maybe they could do. We've had several printers go out on us, and we've used them to prop doors open or to do things, but they're not doing best what they were created for. Keeping it simple, going back to God's original design, his telos, his purpose. And that is how we as humans will best flourish, despite what culture is saying about living our authentic self being the pathway to flourishing. Now, the next one sounds really simple, but I cannot emphasize this enough, that one of the ways that kids are being tricked in thinking that they are something other than the gender that they were born in, or that they're something other than the sexuality that goes with their gender, is because they are being told by all these TikTok influencers, if you feel uncomfortable in your own skin, you're probably transgender. Now, I don't know which of you out there had this wonderful experience with puberty where you just felt comfortable in your own skin and you were just happy with yourself. You understood yourself. It's like, I don't know who had that high school experience, and I know it wasn't me. So one of the things that I have taken to doing, especially with some of the kids that are younger than puberty, is just kind of making jokes every now and then of, oh, how old are you? Oh, 12. Oh, about 2 years before you go totally crazy. And just reminding them that, you know what? Puberty is this hormone-infused misery for a lot of people. This expectation that they're just going to know who they are and feel comfortable with themselves in puberty is an absolute lie from the pit of hell. And our kids are being told that if they feel uncomfortable during puberty, then that means that something's wrong with them being a boy or them being a girl or being heterosexual or homosexual or however they want to describe it. Or we'll have kids, we have such a rise of kids that are on the autism or Asperger's spectrum, that there is a correlation between that demographic and those who are coming out as transgender. The reason, again, going back to our school that's now saying, how can we promote, anyone on the LGBT spectrum, or going back to social justice, or going back to this idea of, there was a third one, but I can't remember, but if you can feel like a complete social outcast, and the solution to that is to identify as something on the LGBTQ umbrella, and then all of a sudden, according to parents, there's a 60% boost in popularity for their kids when they identify as LGBTQ. 60% boost. Parents report a boost in popularity. If you know that there's a way for every single teacher to suddenly have your back, and every single kid in that school to be promoting your dignity and welfare, and for all of a sudden for you to be accepted, that right there, I don't know if I would have been able to resist that temptation as a kid, as a girl who did not feel comfortable as a girl, who did not feel like I got the girl rule book and the girl code that all girls apparently got, that I apparently didn't get. I don't know if I could have resisted that. So again, describing puberty honestly and often, preparing them for the time somewhere between, maybe like 12 and 24 for some people, to feel absolutely not at home in your skin. They need to be aware of that. And then finally, fostering gratitude and contentment. If you go to Romans 1, there's a really interesting thing. So Romans 1, 18 through 32 is the one that talks about that the wrath of God is being revealed against all this unrighteousness by people who had suppressed truth by their wickedness. And I'm just going to say, along the ideas of truth, is that idea of telos, that you can suppress it, try to think about it being a beach ball that you're trying to force under the water. It's going to keep popping up. But one of the things before it says, what may be known about God is plain to them, for God has made it plain to them, and talks about creation, how creation screams creator. And then it talks about, although they knew God, they neither honored him as God nor gave thanks to him, but instead the foolish hearts were darkened and their thinking became futile. And then it goes into some of the longest passages that we see in Scripture on sexual degeneracy. Of first, they're basically degrading each other on a heterosexual level. Then they're degrading. They're coming into what's called unnatural desires between males and males, and even females and females. And then it goes into just this long list of insanity. And one of the things that really stood out to me in there was this concept of gratitude as being the gateway to all of the stuff that's going on. Because if you foster that sense of gratitude, can we go back to the previous slide before we finish up with the roadmap? If you foster this feeling of gratitude, when you suddenly, it's a lot easier to be content in your own body when you have been fostering senses of gratitude. In fact, we had a man that was a homeschool parent that said that he thought he had kept his daughter away from all this stuff, and suddenly she was identifying as transgender. And one of the things he pointed out is, he's like, I think this is a contentment issue. And when we're going to have a podcast coming out for Thanksgiving talking about the effects of gratitude and contentment, how if you purposely foster that in every single area of your life, you'll be surprised at the spiritual protection that you have in other areas of your life. So that is a simple thing that you can do. Fostering gratitude and contentment. I recommend around the dinner table every night saying something specific for that day that you are thankful for. It can't be the general that you say all the time. Oh, I'm thankful for my family. I'm thankful for my friends. Something specific from that day. Oh, I'm thankful for that I did well on this test, or I'm thankful for the lunchtime conversation I had with my friend. I'm thankful for that goal that I scored today. Whatever it is, find everybody in the family says what they're thankful for that day, because what that does is it teaches you to actually watch for it during the day, and it just fosters this continuous feeling of gratitude and contentment. And again, go back and look at Romans 1. I think gratitude is a spiritual protection, especially in the area of sexuality. So then our final slide here is just a reminder, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. We went through the vocab and worldview comparison. We talked about what telos is. I think understanding telos and getting that across to your kids will really help open up the doors. We talked about the 3 tactics of linguistic theft, moralization and repetition. In fact, at the end of the Mama Bear book, the sexuality book, we have an afterword that's titled Things to Repeat to Your Kids Until They Want to Gag. So it's this idea of what are some good positive repetitions that we can get in there. We talked about what the heck is going on in education, a very deep dive into that. But remember, these national sex ed standards, a lot of schools are adopting them, even though they are not mandated by the government. And then finally, what we can do as parents. So that, we came in just under the wire there. So I think we're going to have a break now.
Hillary, can y'all give it up for Hillary real quick, please? Hillary, I know that was a lot, but we're super thankful for that. Lots of great information. But there's a lot of things that stood out. If you're tuning in online or you're in here, there's several good quotes that she said and a lot of things. One of them that triggered me was the concept of love and truth. And I remember Beth Moore gave a quote that said, we're living in a generation now that in an attempt to love more like Jesus, they set the Bible aside in order to just love, but they take Jesus out of the equation and they're not seeing who Jesus truly is. So that was one thing that really stood out to me because we actually see that and we live that. But what was maybe one thing that you feel like really stood out to you in this?
Fact, because I grew up in the house where my parents didn't mention anything about anything. And so I learned everything from the back of the school bus, which is not what I want for my children. Right. And so we're trying to be super intentional. And I love the idea that if our kids can feel safe coming to mom and dad, asking questions, and if we could be viewed as the expert and cultivate that relationship where my kids feel safe with me, like that's what I want. I want my child, when they have a question or when they're exposed to something, that they know, hey, I can come to mom and dad. This is a safe person. This is an expert. And so that was really, really helpful.
Yeah, and I'm sure that all of you have a lot of questions are probably navigating through your head. I like when something's said and I can hear somebody in the back go, or something like that. So don't forget to text 98173. Text your question to that. I promise it's nothing weird. Your name's not going to pop up on the screen. It's very safe. I've already sent in 2 questions myself. And so make sure you do that. And then the last thing, we're going to have a quick intermission. And what I'd love for you to do is take a break. We're going to have about 5 minutes. It'll be on the screen. We're going to have all of our booths are going to be set up over here. We're going to have people there. If you guys are at a booth or a table, go ahead and make your way over there. But make sure that you stop by. If you have questions or how we can better partner with you, make sure you do that. And so right now, if you will, go ahead and take a break. We'll see you online in just a second. Thank you.
All right, and we're back. That was like the quickest 5-minute break ever. Man, I don't know about you, but I was just walking around some of the tables and asking people, are you as overwhelmed as I am right now? But surprisingly, Hillary, a lot of people said no. I thought that was awesome, which props to you, okay? So Hillary, some people are still coming back in, but as people were finding their seat, I have to comment on a couple things. One, I don't know if you could hear it, but when you sneezed, there was like the whole room kind of went, oh, like that was an adorable sneeze, okay? Just so you know. I had a lot of people text in, that was the cutest sneeze we've ever heard. So that's one of the questions that came through. And then also you mentioned that kids get crazy when they start puberty. Our kids are 6, 8, and 10. So apparently they've been in puberty for a long time. So just had to go ahead and get that out of the way. All right. Well, everybody's finding their seat. Hillary, again, thank you so much. Man, what a wealth of information you are. And I just want to say thank you for taking some time to hang out with us tonight and devoting so much of your life to helping us navigate these things. I do want to recommend, she's not going to pub her own book, so I'll pub it for her. Mama Bear Apologetics. There's 2 of them. The one we're specifically talking about tonight is The Guide to Sexuality. So I highly want to recommend you checking out that book. Hillary, what is your website? Can you give us your website real quick?
Yes, it's www.mamabearapologetics, and mama is spelled M-A-M-A. I have people spell it all sorts of funky ways, but it's M-A-M-A, bearapologetics.com.
It's okay. If you spend much time with Long Haul, you will come to find out I have a hard time spelling as well. So it's cool. So we misspell things around here all the time. All right. So Hillary, I have a couple questions that we're going to walk through. And you guys have sent in some doozies. Okay. So I'm just going to read them and we'll talk about them as they come up. Okay. All right. Okay. So you talked about bringing up these hard issues with your kids first, before friends, teachers, etc. At what age would you start that? How deep do parents need to go with that? And I think one caveat for me, as I'm thinking about this question, is my kids are 6, 8, and 10. I remember Jenny and I had to go to Waffle House and have a conversation about homosexuality with our 3rd grader, which we were not expecting to do in 3rd grade. So I think one thing for me too is like, how do I get ahead of these conversations without piquing their interest and sparking something in their mind that may not already be there as well?
Yeah, and this is one of those things where there really is no specific age, in the sense that you're going to have kids that are wildly different developmental levels. And they are not only that, it's how much they notice. One kid will notice something and another kid will be completely oblivious. So I would say we have 1 month every year that naturally brings up these conversations, and that would be June. And we have a good article on Mama Bear about how to prepare your kids for Pride Month, that this is the kind of thing where as you're walking around, when everything explodes into rainbows and love, asking kids, do you know what that means? Do you know what this is? And just kind of seeing what they already know. What have your friends said about this? One of the greatest things you can do is ask your kids, what have your friends said about this? For 2 reasons. Number one, it kind of tells you where they are. Number 2, sometimes kids, because it's one of those topics that they're kind of unsure about, will be more comfortable kind of like, well, I had one friend say, and then they have like the question that's their question. And so I would just be paying attention. I know this can be hard sometimes, but kind of watching some of the media with them to pick up on things like at the beginning of the book, we have Amy's story about how there was just this one little moment in that show, I think The Loud House, where her son turned and looked at her and goes, well, wait, Mom, did the girl have a crush on a girl? And so she's like, okay, we're having this conversation now. So that would be it. I would say pay attention to what's around them. How much do they pay attention? Ask them what their friends already know, and then use the stuff in your surroundings to ask them, what do you know what that means? Do you know what that means? Are you curious? If you're ever curious, you can ask me. And that way it's organic and you're not sitting down and being like, okay, sweetie, let's have a talk. And then of course they freak
weird.
out.
Yeah. Oh my God. I love that. I love those questions you gave us to ask them, especially what are your friends saying about this? That's such a good one. And in our house, we get that look all the time. Like when somebody, like we're watching a show and somebody cusses or something, my kids look at me like, yes, I heard it. I know. But those are moments in our house. Like if Jenny's letting the kids watch a movie they shouldn't be watching or something, I'm just kidding. I'll pay for that later. If Daddy's watching Spider-Man with them or something, and somebody slips a cuss word, we get those big eyes. But we always find those moments. Okay, a way to interact with them and walk them through. Hey, the world says this. That doesn't mean we say that. Yada yada yada. Okay. Next question here. All right. Where's the line between walking through social, like shows, movies, social media, etc., with kids and restricting certain things entirely? I want my kids to self-navigate modern culture, but also don't want to let the outside influence, don't necessarily want the outside to influence them completely. So where's the line there?
That's a hard one.
In your opinion.
In my opinion, so like one thing I want everybody to be aware of right now that some people don't know is my husband and I don't have children. And I talk about that in the first book that, when the Lord called me to this ministry, I thought, I'm supposed to pass it on to somebody else, someone with kids. And the Lord just kind of really impressed upon me that I have something that moms don't have, which is time to research. So that, is why you get wonderful research with Mama Bear. Some of the more practical things I may not always be able to say with absolute, I have moms that talk to me, so I can give kind of my opinion based on the things that they've been told. I know what I would do if we had kids right now. So if we had young kids right now, I would not have any streaming services. And if they, I would put them even like on one TV where, it's password protected, and I would invest in tons and tons of DVDs. And you can get so many of those from thrift stores and all sorts of things that give your kids an entire media wall to choose things from. That would be my recommendation for stuff for younger kids. As they get older, I would be, I'm trying to think of, there's certain places you can go to for parents where they go through certain shows. Like there's a show that's out right now, and I'm trying to remember what the name of it is. It's got the girl that's from Spider-Man. What's her name again?
Lois Lane. I'm just kidding. That's Superman. I don't even know. I don't know. MJ?
You just
No,
said
the
Spider-Man,
actual person, Zendaya. Is that who we're talking about?
Yeah, Zendaya.
Are we getting anywhere?
Zendaya.
Okay, there we go. Zendaya.
Yeah. No, she is in a show right now, and I'm trying to remember what the name of it is. In fact, I'm going to look this up.
I'm hearing the
while
crowd
we're
saying Euphoria. Does that sound correct?
Euphoria.
Apparently they've watched it.
Absolutely. Like from what I can tell, do not let your kids get anywhere near it. If like they are, find out, make sure all the parents that they're going to, the stuff that I've read on that with how graphic the nature is of that, nobody should navigate that, period. It is, from what I can tell, from what I've heard, from what I've read, there's so many things that are just straight up pornography and grooming. Now there are certain things that we would say use the chew and spit method. I recommend as much as you can having the television, not having any TVs in private areas, having the TV there and loud wherever everybody is, so you can kind of hear what's going on and be able to stop things as they come. One of the things that I've noticed with a lot of the moms that I talk to is that when they watch stuff with their kids and they're able to put things on pause and point something out and talk through it, the kids start doing that themselves, and they will actually call the parent in and rewind it and say, hey, did you see that right there? And they're pointing out things that are unbiblical worldview. So it's like, I would say really start teaching your kids the chew and spit method, which we talk about in the first book, about this idea of we bring everything in and then we compare it to what is biblical and what is not. And one of the things that I had this one parent tell me about that was great, that she started giving her daughter, I think, some kind of little thing like a quarter every time she could find a lie that was said somewhere. So that would be step one, where you're teaching them to spot lies that are against the knowledge of God. And I said, okay, you're going to start having this little, the party of no, like I talk in the first book, where all they can do is spot the lies. And that's just not a fun person to be around. Now, the second thing is we're going to give them a second quarter if they can find the partial truth. That lie, it is wrapped around that lie. And so you're teaching your kids this again, is the chew and spit, that most lies are wrapped in partial truths. And so you need to, everything's going to be this, separate the good from the bad, accept the good, reject the bad. That's what I teach with the roar technique. And and you're actively training them to sift through culture. So I would say start it young, and there's plenty of stuff in those old DVDs that you don't have to go out and research a ton of new shows in order to do that. You can start that practice with them. And then when they start being able to do that on their own, then you can start maybe introducing a limited aspect of some of the streaming, or find out what some of the shows their friends are watching, stuff like that, and slowly introduce it, but making sure that they know how to exercise that muscle of discernment before you just let them loose.
Okay, so something real practical. You may know this offhand, but I know sometimes before we watch a movie with the kids, we'll look it up on like a website to see what parent reviews are. Can you maybe give us a couple resources where we can look that stuff up?
I know that there's a bunch of them, but the one that I personally go to is called kidsinmind.com. And so they divide it up into things like language, violence and gore, sexuality, and I think there's a fourth category, and it ranks it in terms of, it'll list everything, is if a woman bends over and you can see cleavage, it'll be listed there. Which to me, it's like, it wouldn't even occur to me to have to like put that, but that shows you the level of detail. I went to this website before I watched the movie Black Swan, and thank God I did, because I've never watched that movie after I watched I looked at the description of some of the stuff going on in there. So kidsinmind.com. I really, really recommend them. I know that there's another one that some other people use, but I can't remember what it's called. So.
Well, no, that's great. Thank you for that. I know you mentioned old DVDs. I remember one time we watched What About Bob with our kids. And when I was a kid, I remember it being hilarious. And then I'm like, why am I letting my kids watch this? This is PG. So maybe look up some of those old DVDs as well, okay? All right.
Also, you need to remember what things you watched from TV versions.
Oh,
so,
see,
I
blame my
absolutely
parents for that.
convinced my dad that my mom would love the movie The Birdcage. And when we saw it on DVD, and he kept saying, I don't think so. And then I watched it. I was like, I don't remember all this stuff. Or even Airplane has like some pretty racy stuff in it that they cut out. Yeah, you'll. It's amazing how much you pick up when you watch things with kids. You're like,
For
I
sure.
don't
I don't remember that. I still remember my dad making me leave when they were watching Dances with Wolves. I don't know why. I just know I had to leave the room.
I know what scene it is.
So I just knew never to watch it. So I still haven't seen it. I think Kevin Costner's in that movie. Who Field of Dreams I did watch. Anyways, all right. So moving on. Next question. Thank you guys for sending these questions, by the way. This was sent in by, I'm just kidding. I don't even know who sent this in. All right, it says this. It says, my teen makes me feel like I'm a horrible person when I point them to God's design versus accepting what culture says about sexuality. How do I parent through that?
This is that thing where you say, the mind has a hard time distinguishing between that which is familiar and that which is true. And you are dealing with a teen that has heard the secular sexual worldview so many times that they consider it to be true. Go back to your chart and see the things that they are saying you're an evil person on. You will probably be able to identify it in that chart. So I don't know this particular situation. I don't know this particular kid. When they get to that point, let me just tell a story that I remember from when I was in high school that always stuck with me. I found that a change in environment can do loads. So there was a coach that when I was in high school, I think I spent 2 years at a Christian school. And he was talking about when he was in high school, he just started getting with the wrong people, wrong friends, wrong everything. And his parents literally, I think, took him out of everything. I can't remember if they homeschooled him. He was allowed to go to like work and back home, but he couldn't hang out with anybody. They had to be drastic. And he describes it as the best thing that ever happened to him. There's another family that I know currently, and not many people are in this position, but they were at a Christian school that started going from, historic Orthodox Christianity to universalism, and their kids were starting to come out with all these janky things, and they happened to have a vacation home somewhere. And so they basically picked the whole family up and moved, and the difference in the kids. So I'm not saying that everybody else has to have like a vacation home and get up and move, but I am saying that if you are at that point where the child is still young enough to have several more years under your roof, and you are seeing that they are having such horrific worldview being taught into them, It's one of those things you can either backfire royally or it'll be the best thing that ever happened to them. You got to think about how do we change the environment? And number one, we have a podcast that came out recently called Digital Detox. It's a book written by a woman named Molly DeFrank. And you would be surprised at the before and after of kids when they have to go through a 2-week-long digital detox. So that would be one of the first things. We have to get them away from all the voices that are saying things that are so familiar that they sound true. Number two, I would look at what that child's faith in Christ was before. How does that child view Christianity now? What kind of home environment are they in? Is this something where the Christian worldview has been modeled? Or is it one of those things where mom and dad forced me to go to church, and when they get home, all they do is fight, and they're like all these things, and heck no, I don't want anything to do with that. And I know that means that you have to really look hard into some of the things, but it's like all these things you have to take into account. So I'd say the number one advice that I have for that one is to pray and ask the Holy Spirit to direct you. And then immerse yourself in prayer and be learning how to listen, have wise counsel that's along with you, find other Christian parents that maybe have kids in the same environment, be doing your research on that. But most importantly, the Lord knows what your child needs. Sometimes that'll be an environment thing. Sometimes that might be a hard look at yourself. You don't know what that is. But in the culture that we're in, and I cannot say this enough, we have gotten used to this idea that we can be comfortable. And there are very few Christian experiences throughout world history where that was the norm, to where we really think that is the norm. It is time that we start getting ready to do hard things. If that means that my job is going to force me to say things that I don't want to say, I have to risk my job. If that means that the public school is heavily reinforcing all the things that we just talked about today, we do what we can to get them out of that environment. We have to start being ready to do the hard things, because as uncomfortable as that is now, your job is to raise godly Christ followers, and there is nothing more important than that. Your kids can, like our mama bear, Amy, she has 3 boys, and she and her husband live in a 900 square foot 2-bedroom house with 1 bathroom, and they are as happy as you can possibly imagine. It can be done. You just have to be willing to do whatever it takes in order to disciple your kids, and that's really what it comes down to.
And that was good. I know the change in environment is something that we had to do in our own family. We love the public school system. We have a ton of educators in our church. Shout out to all of you guys. So thankful for you. That's just a decision we had to make for our family because of some things he was being exposed to. And when you were talking earlier, you said a couple things. I saw some mama bears triggered in here. They started emailing their schools like as you were talking. So before they finish writing those emails, I have this question that you can give us some advice on. So any advice for talking with schools about what sex ed materials they're using to teach our kids? Also, if we see our kids' school promoting these harmful ideas, how can we fight that?
Okay.
And
so I'm going to find the actual.
And I want to, fight that is the word they send in, which I understand. I mean, it's our job to raise our kids. And maybe I would say advocate for them, or advocate for, the best thing for them.
Yep. First off, everybody, whoever has that question, page 85 to 86 in the book, we specifically talk about that. Secondly, I would say contact. So I don't know who it is in y'all are Tennessee, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Tennessee.
Yeah. I don't know who it is with y'all. I just did a conference in Pennsylvania that had something called the Pennsylvania Family Council, that is kind of like a group sort of like Alliance Defending Freedom. There's a couple other ones that are like that deal with kind of some of these legal issues in the public schools. First off, I would recognize that we are not on the home. What do you say? We're not on the home turf anymore. So asking them to teach things according to anything remotely biblical and Christian is like going to somewhere in the Middle East and asking them to teach Christianity in the public schools. It's not going to happen. I would say Tennessee actually has a better chance than a lot, just from the stuff that I've heard going on there that seem like they've got, when you say the clearer minds are prevailing. I would definitely go about it. Again, go to 85, 86 in there, find out who some of the legal people are in the area that know what your rights are, because it is going to vary based on state. Find out what what the opt-in is. We have a whole set of things on those pages that I gave you, a whole set of questions to ask and ways to go about that. So I would just reference the book. It's going to say it more succinctly than I can.
What a great way to sell some books. All right, so we have about 3 minutes left. So a couple quick questions here. What would be some very early conversations to start with preschoolers? And then just family in general, are these better one-on-one conversations, or, hey, sitting down, playing Uno conversations? I don't know.
I am so glad you asked, because this is something that I wanted to, that I didn't have until we had the study guide. And so I actually have a 3-step process that I recommend that parents do from an early age that is going to preempt so many of these conversations, and it's going to raise your kids to be able to interact as Christ followers without being obnoxious with their Christianity, which sometimes, in this honest zeal for God, sometimes we can be obnoxious for Christ. So we just have to recognize that happens. So this is my 3-step process when they're young. The first thing we're going to be acknowledging is that who is created in the image of God? That's the question that we're asking, and we're going to repeat it over and over again. And we're going to say, what about that homeless man? What about mommy? What about daddy? What about your brother? What about your sister? What about that grass over there? Nope. What about the dog? Nope. Not created in the image of God. What about that person who's in a wheelchair? Yes, created in the image of God. What about that person who's dressed like a clown? Yes, created in the image of God. You'd be surprised at how sometimes when kids see things like, well, that person's handicapped, or that person's dressed like a clown, God's not a clown, that they have a hard time saying no, because they're human, they're created in the image of God. And so this is the first step to where they know that anything you point out that is not human, no, is not created in the image of God. Anything you point to that is human, even the baby in that pregnant mommy's belly, yes, created in the image of God. That's step 1. Step 2 is we are created to reflect the image of God, and some things reflect God's image and some things don't reflect God's image. And so when we are having to say, like you say, your kids will turn over and look at you when there's curse word, you say, is that reflecting God's image? Nope. Anytime you see blatant sin that's going on, is that reflecting God's image? Nope. When you see something that's good that's going on, is that reflecting God's image? Yes, that is reflecting God's image. Now, we want to make it personal. When they do things that require punishment, you ask them, sorry, I skipped a step. I do
that all the time. It's okay.
I know, right? First step is who's created in the image of God. Step 2 is how do we treat people created in the image of God. And it's worthy of dignity and respect and honor as image bearers. Now, that doesn't mean agreement. That doesn't mean affirmation. That doesn't mean celebration, but that means dignity and respect. And so no matter who it is, say that, and you'll have opportunities when you're in the line, as someone who's totally rude. And once you get to the car, don't have it right then. Was that person created in the image of God? Yes. Were they reflecting the image of God? No. How do we still treat them as image bearers? With dignity and respect. So this is like the concepts that you're bringing together for them. And then when they disobey, when they act in ways that don't display the image of God, you ask them, were you reflecting the image of God? No. What this is teaching them is that I have things in myself, or mommy has things in herself, or daddy has things in him that don't reflect the image of God. Now what we're doing is we're distinguishing between that which we do and that what we of who we are. At this point, when they know every human's made in the image of God's, not everything we do reflects that image of God, then when we start having to introduce them to the concepts of transgender and homosexuality, we can say, is this person made in the image of God? Yes. How do we treat people made in the image of God with dignity and respect? Is this person doing something that's reflecting the image of God? No. And then at that point, we can also bring up the Holy Spirit. Is it our job to always be the person to tell them that they're not reflecting the image of God? Also, no. Most of the time, that's not going to be our job. It is the Holy Spirit's job to convict. That is not ours. As my pastor used to say, we do not walk around with Deputy Holy Spirit badges on. So sometimes some people need to take off that Deputy Holy Spirit badge.
My 8-year-old has that badge, by the way.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Hey, you know what? Every obnoxious trait that everybody's kid has in here is an unredeemed strength.
Oh, I was going to say your child, they got it from my wife.
Yeah, I'll say that your daughter, if she's like that, she values truth, and that should be affirmed. Now, sometimes truth tellers right here have a hard time not always wanting to tell the truth to everyone, whether they ask for it or not. But again, it's an unredeemed strength that the Lord will use. So anyway, that's my step for taking it from when they're young to taking with them when they're older, so that when they finally get to the place where they're meeting people who, no matter what kind of mental health issues or what kind of identity or what kind of sexual this or that, we treat people made in the image of God as worthy and dignity of respect, but we don't apply that to their actions, and we don't say things reflect God's image when they don't. And so it separates the ideology from the person. And that's a really hard thing for adults to do if they have not been trained in that. So train your kids from the beginning. For sure. Well, Hillary, thank you so much. That process is so great. Excuse me. How can we get a hold of that study guide that you mentioned? Is that on your website also? Yeah, it's on the website. It's on Amazon. It's at most of the places. We call it the discipleship workbook. And I did that specifically because we had so much information in the second book. For anyone who's read the first book, we had, 14 chapters of ism chapters where we got to go through the roar process. Well, we had, the first half of the book, we don't get to do that. And so there's a lot of just activities to reinforce these concepts with your kids that we added into the discipleship workbook. And that, like the ones that I just said, this is called the Image of God game. And this is in the discipleship workbook of those steps of how to teach your kids before they meet, their gay uncle. How do you treat someone? What kind of conversations do you have at Thanksgiving when Uncle Bob brings home, Dan as his date? So, that's the discipleship workbook has all sorts of extra activities that you can do with your kids to reinforce these ideas. But yeah, basically wherever books are sold, Christian books, Amazon, all the places. Awesome. Well, Hillary, thank you so much. I'm officially a mama bear myself now, okay? Long hollow, if you can, give Hillary a long hollow thank you. We cannot thank you enough for that. So, all right. Well, hey, if you are joining us online right now, I know there's several groups out there, so shout out to our people in Montana, our crew in California, and other parts of the country as well. We're actually going to transition online to a time of discussion. So if you want to discuss further with your group, we have some questions coming up. For those of you here on campus with us, I want to just tell you again, we know parenting is hard. If you're like me, you may feel a little bit overwhelmed by this conversation, but it takes a village, and we are here to be a part of your village. So we want to equip you to be the chief disciple makers in your home. We want to set you up for success, and we want to partner alongside of you. So earlier, and you've heard Will and Kelly talk about it a couple times, we have our booth areas over here. Just to tell you a little bit more about them, I highly encourage you to check these out. We're here to be a resource with you. We have all of our next gen team kind of hanging out in the middle. That's birth through high school. Okay, so go say hello to them. They have all kinds of awesome ways they can partner with you. Here at this first table here, we have the landing. Okay, which here's the thing. Life is hard, even for teenagers, and this is a safe place for them to walk through the hurts, hang-ups, and habits of life with other teenagers, and we're going to point them toward Jesus. So awesome resource with the landing. If you're like me, kind of the next step for our families, we're trying to figure out how to get our kids on mission. Like, how can we get our kids serving? How can we teach them to love people the way Jesus loved people? So we got our missions team over there. And then if you are an adult, and you're thinking, man, I just really need some community. Like, I need to do life with people. I need other people walking through this life with me. We got our groups team over there in the corner as well. They would love to talk to you about trying to find some community. So again, thank you guys so much for coming. We really, really love you guys, and I hope this night was helpful. And you can check out the booths and get some more Legacy coffee. Y'all have a good night. Bye.